The Council of the Gods. Ultimately, the universe and the planets in this fiction are the creation of a small council of gods. 3 gods represent the various forces in the universe. There was Ducellus, the god of energy and systems, Nesmera, the god of time and destiny, and Cularis, the god of perception, consciousness, and awareness. Ducellus was the god over all which was physical. The planets and stars, the physical makeup of the universe, and nature itself were under his command and domain. His powers were in the creation of matter and physical form. His divine energy was responsible for the materialization of all the elements, their weight and mass, and their very placement in the vast emptiness of the void before him. Ducellus was proud of his creation and found the various states of matter to be of brilliant curiosity. From particles so dense and tiny to massive giant spheres made of gases and energy, Ducellus became obsessed with endless variety in his creations and explored them in all their possibilities. Nesmera held domain over all that had transpired and all that would transpire. She held time in her hands and could make decisions about the direction things flowed. The expansion of the universe was not yet a given, and Nesmera had decided it should move. As Ducellus's creations entered the void of space, Nesmera imbued them with movement, rotation, choreography, and oscillation. She was able to strike them with overtones and harmonies that would eternally resonate, keeping them in motion and imbuing them with her energy. Cularis held command over consciousness. Their place in the council was directly between Ducellus and Nesmera, in that they exist between time and space. Cularis is the embodiment of what we know as sentience. If Ducellus is the physical and material, Cularis is immaterial. If Nesmera is temporal, Cularis is eternal. One might make the mistake of assuming Cularis had more power than the other 2 gods, but it was the oppositional pull that balanced this out. When the universe was first being formed and Ducellus and Nesmera were establishing the elements and their magnetism and connections, Cularis sought to give them a connective tissue. This larger binding established an early, primitive consciousness by forming a kind of network. The connection caused every particle that Ducellus had made and every frequency that Nesmera struck to affect one another. This net was both physical and non-physical at the same time. The planetary bodies, stars, and elements stretched, pulled, and warped this fabric, creating gravity and cyclical motion and weight. One could say that the earliest consciousness created the weight of its existence through the connection of all things. The gods could almost feel one another through the existence of the other 2. A triad of powerful energies such as this created enormous forces between them, both bending and blending them. It was material and immaterial at once. They were bound together, and this was the pact. When one acted, those forces were exerted on the others, and they in turn reacted. It was, for lack of a better description, a collaboration of sorts, and it may sound restrictive. It was in actuality a cooperation of balance. Now let's try to visualize this relationship a little. If each god was the vertex or point on a triangle, we start to get the picture. Even though the points face outward, the points are connected by the sides. The sides are the blended space between the gods and pull towards the center, creating the universe. In some ways, our triangle is a dynamic relationship of forces where the points pull gently outward, and the subtle pressure that is exerted on the middle is the space the universe hangs in. It was the space at the center of this triangle that contained the complex mixture that created the universe. The Pact of Equity speaks of the council having equal say in decisions, but the reality of this relationship was more complicated than a contract or agreement. It was a connection with a physical magnetism. If any of the 3 acted, the remaining 2 and all that existed between them, within and around them, were affected. It has been considered that these were not three gods, but one god with three facets of divinity. But this argument is no more than an attempt to twist the narrative into a more authoritarian voice. The three gods were that of cooperation. Any attempt to argue for one was considered blasphemy to the universe. So that's our little contribution to Vesper for today. This is sort of where I began writing this world and this story. I was really interested in creation myths and mythology in general. And so this idea of a singular omnipotent god was less interesting to me than something more like a cooperative of three minds. And so the three gods sort of became my starting point. Also, three as a number and its symmetry, or not its symmetry, but its compositional perfection, its usage throughout the history of painting and the Renaissance and, frankly, all things, also held a visual interest for me. And so by threeing this, and I use the word three as a verb because I've threed a lot of things in this universe and a lot of things around Vesper itself, which you'll learn about as you listen to this podcast more. The act of three creates a really interesting set of forces in that when you put the three together like a triangle, there is balance there, and they also sort of can't really get away from one another. They all act in conjunction with one another. And that's really, really kind of beautiful to me. Three is also a number that, when we think about trinities and we think about holy symbolism, these things, come up quite a bit. So from a symbolic standpoint, it made a lot of sense to me. Now, you're going to hear me talk a lot in my commentary from episode to episode about the power of, visual thinking and about how visual thinkers, and if you're not one, you can very easily become one, how you can extrapolate ideas and thought from something your hand jots down, like a series of marks on a page, or by looking at an image. You could look at an abstract image and find a scene in it. You can make an abstract image, and the brush stroke of your paintbrush or the mark making of your ballpoint pen on the page, and its repetition, its weight, its pressure, all of these things get your thinking mechanisms to work. And before you know it, ideas start to form. Doodling, for lack of a better word, and I don't like the word doodle, but doodling can actually have some profound impact on your idea centers. The movement of your hand is a powerful activator of the idea centers in your brain. And so for me, when I'm world building, this is the way I start. I will start, if I'm stuck, I will make marks and I will just kind of see what lands on the page. There's a map making technique you've probably seen on the internet where someone pours a cup of rice onto a page and then they trace the outline that forms. That is exactly what I'm talking about how an unintentional, randomly generated image can lead to something. So imagine that map for a minute, if you will. Rice gets poured on a piece of paper. It's all randomly hitting and creates a blob, essentially. You take a pen and you draw an outline around it. Now, if you're careful about it and you consider the shape of each grain of rice and you don't just generalize, you get into some detail. You allow some of those subtle areas where the rice goes inward and then protrudes outward to become little inlets and estuaries and sections of beach line. And you create a shape that has an edge. And that edge might hint at areas of river, or it might hint at areas of mountains. And that all of a sudden can become the stuff that starts your idea centers flowing. And so that map for me, when I first started out that way, created this entire world. I saw 3 primary locations on this first map that seemed like logical places to put the larger cities. And there was 3 again. And so this is kind of how the visuals of this, stemming from the notion of 3, have begun to build my universe and the world of Vesper. Now, you'll also notice at some point when I get down to creating the PDFs around this, that there is a diagram, a rough diagram I made in my notebook of that triangle. On each point, you have Ducelis, Nesmera, and Cularis, each on a singular point. And the spaces between them on this equilateral triangle create the sort of tensions between them. So for example, you have Ducellus at the top, Cularis at the bottom left. And between those two, Ducellus being the physical and Cularis being consciousness, well, between them you have existence. The existence of a being is a mixture of the physical being and the consciousness that they hold. So the space between those two gods and the tension created becomes the physical being, the existence. If you look between Cularis on the bottom left and Nesmera on the bottom right, you have consciousness with Cularis and time with Nesmera. And between those two things, I kind of felt like the soul fit in there, because the soul is this kind of idea of your consciousness, your awareness of the self through time. Time informs that thing and creates what is essentially a soul, like who we are at our deepest core. And then the last leg of the triangle is between Nesmera, time, and Ducellus, the physical, which is creation. Creation is the making of the physical universe through and over time. And so those three spaces between the gods are the blending of each god that is on one of those vertices, which I find to be kind of, and listen, I did not just dream this up one day. This happened by accident as I drew a triangle on a page. And then I wrote the names of those gods on the points of the triangles, just to kind of like lay them out. That forced me to think about the spaces between them. And I thought, oh, what happens there? And then, of course, if I do that, the last step is to say, oh, okay, well then what is happening in the center of that triangle where all three of those forces act on one another? We've got three gods. We've got three sort of spaces between those gods. And at the center of the triangle, we have what comes together as all of them. And that is, of course, the universe that we are in. So my world building started out that simply in this case. I love to have you along. I'm hoping that you enjoy this and pass it along. If you haven't listened to the introduction, go back and check that out. And I will try to drop one of these every week. Head on over to YouTube, where Wither and Bloom Studios has a great YouTube channel where you can see a lot of this storyline in action, where we are actually playing this out. We play this as a Daggerheart game. We play this as a Dungeons & Dragons game. We have several different campaigns going across that channel. So check that out. And thanks for coming along for the ride. I look forward to seeing you next week. For now, I'm Todd. Take care.